Sally Weeks and Harmon Weeks are two of the three authors of the book Native Trees of the Midwest, Identification, Wildlife Values, and Landscaping Use. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for having us.
Well, we should talk about your two of the three authors, and the other one could not be here today, is George Parker. Talk a little bit about maybe just the three of your collaboration.
Well, George was my major professor for my master's degree, and this project started initially as a CD on trees of Indiana. It eventually expanded to this book, and Purdue Press requested that we include other species in surrounding states, so we decided to go with native trees of the Midwest. And so George was a key player, but less so than the two of us, I would say.
More guiding, probably.
Yes, editing,
Yeah.
writing small sections, yes.
And so it was specifically Indiana, correct, is how you started it?
Initially.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing there isn't much difference, though, from Indiana and surrounding states or the Midwest in general. Kind of all the same climate, would you say? That it made for an easy transition?
Fairly easy, but I think we ended up adding 20 new species, and expanded the I guess initial idea of the Midwest greatly. So we expanded down into central Tennessee and out into Nebraska and all, which really isn't the Midwest, but we wanted to include as many species as was reasonable.
And several of these trees don't occur in Indiana, but are frequently planted in Indiana, especially some of the northern trees, some of the spruces and firs, for instance. They really aren't native, so they weren't initially included, but when we go to the surrounding states and we include those, and they're very common in Indiana, but planted principally.
Well, talk about those that are native, true native to the state. I mean, what are we talking about in terms of numbers or the variety of those?
It's roughly 100 native species of trees to Indiana, and then you add another 20 or so to include a large portion that are planted here and that occur in the Midwest. So, 120, 125, depending on whether you're a lumper or a splitter.
What is the range of those species? Because in the book you talk about how southern Indiana, and in some parts it's swamp-like, and northern Indiana you're talking about sort of Michigan climate. What's sort of the range?
Well, most species probably occur throughout the state in actuality. Okay. But there are specialty trees in southern Indiana, for instance, that really have more southern affinities, so that they come up the Mississippi drainage, for instance, and up the Ohio, and come into just a little bit of Indiana. And the same happens to the north. You've got trees that essentially come down from Michigan and Wisconsin and reach their lower limits of the distribution in northern Indiana. But for the most part, I think trees are fairly well distributed over the state.
I grew up in northern Illinois, and I went to school in southern Illinois and worked there for a while. So it's sort of the same juxtaposition in that, I don't remember in northern Illinois the dogwoods blooming like they do in the southern part of the state, much like Kentucky. I'm familiar with that as well. So who's this book designed for, I guess? Who would find the most use out of it? Obviously, it's applicable to everybody who's interested in identifying, but and when you were writing it, who did you have in mind?
We wrote it for the lay public, I would say. We tried to avoid the difficult technical terminology, explain some of it in the front of the book initially, but we do use it as a textbook in dendrology, and so it's really for everybody who is interested in trees and identifying trees.
I like to think it's a good mix, because Sally's been teaching this 20 years or more, and when you teach students, I think you get a good grip on exactly what the important features are and how to stress those. And it's written at the level, I think, that the general public can understand it quite well. But we do include keys, for instance. So there are keys, winter and as well as summer keys to all of them, which would help with identification for anybody that's understands terminology fairly well in vegetation and in trees.
I was going to say, not knowing much about trees, some of the technical terms, the glossary that you have in the front of the book explains it pretty well, that anybody can find their way through as far as, the leaf positions or the branch positions, and it's a easy read, so to speak, in that.
Well,
Now,
That's good.
I'm good to hear you say. Glad to hear you say that, because I think it is too, and probably ought to say that Purdue Press did a fantastic job in putting it together. We were ultimately really pleased with the outcome,
Very
and
much.
Margaret Hunt was the late Margaret Hunt was the editor, and essentially physically put it together in design, and she just did a wonderful job.
talk about some of the differences that this has or similarities to other guidebooks. What were you going for? What were you hoping to make, unique about it?
I think its uniqueness is the completeness of color plates of as many characteristics as we could cover. And that idea stems from the fact that we travel a lot around the country, and when we do, we're botanizing, we're looking at trees, and he's a big birder, so we're also looking at birds. So we're in some of the wildest areas we can find, and whenever we travel to these locations, I in particular am desperately searching for good field guides, and it's very, very frustrating to come across good ones. So my idea was to take as many color pictures as I could to illustrate these characteristics, and that is, I think, its greatest value, in my opinion. I don't know if my hubby would agree with that or not.
Yeah, I think that's true. Most field guides, the standard field guide that you buy, maybe will just have pictures of leaves, for instance, and so which is fine as long as there are leaves on the trees. But in times when there aren't, you have to key on bark and twigs and those kinds of things. And Sally's, from having taught that characteristics other than leaves for so many years, I think she's got a very, very good grip on descriptions and variations. And so including that really sets this above a standard field guide, I think. Plus practical in the text, and practical keys as to what to look for and how to key things to determine this species, and then how to tell this species from others with ease, and all of that's in there. So students still always bring twigs up to me in my classes. I teach a habitat management course, and my standard reply is, well, I think it's this, but I'll have to take it to Sally and find out, and I'll let you know.
The other part of the book, besides identification, is wildlife values and landscaping use, which seems unique as well to a book of this type. Talk about why you wanted to incorporate that and what exactly wildlife values means.
I think I will, yes, refer that question to you, because I want to say Mick. Harmon, my husband, is the wildlife professor and has been for 40 years, but he's been involved with wildlife, birds in particular, since he was 4 years old. So his grasp, his knowledge on these critters and how they utilize habitats and woody species, all the way down to the smallest herbaceous species is amazing, and the literature out there available to people, especially folks like wildlife biologists who are wanting to know what species of wildlife utilize what species of plants, is very, I hate to say next to nothing, but it's just about that. So he decided that he was going to include this kind of information in the book. And would you like to add something to that?
Well, yeah, I have taught habitat management for a long time, and of course, and as Sally said, have first-hand observations of goings-on between animals and trees for a long, long time. And so I think the sections, while it's a subset of what the book is about, I think those sections, I like to think, of course I'm a little biased about it, I suppose, but I think they're fairly inclusive. I mean, not only do we talk about fruits that might be eaten by birds, but how birds might use those sites, those shrubs or trees for nesting, what species might use them, any uniqueness about the structure of the tree that makes it especially attractive to squirrels or birds or deer is included. So I think those, I'm quite proud of those sections, and I think they have a lot of applicability and make the book attractive to wildlife biologists and folks just interested in the environment as well.
I have to say, a tree in my front yard, an evergreen, for lack of the proper name of it, looking kind of gnarly towards the bottom, so we trimmed up the branches, and, we've seen fewer rabbits in the front yard because I know they were hiding in there at times, and even the birds don't really hang out in the front yard so much. So it's really remarkable how just one tree affects so many different animals.
In urban, suburban situations, that's
right.
Absolutely true as well. But conifers, for instance, are really kind of unique because they provide very good thermal cover, protection from wind and snow and all, just like we seek such protection. And so a conifer can make a lot of difference in an urban situation, especially our suburban situation.
As far as the landscaping uses go, in the book, I believe it's a little bit about how landscapers are now looking towards the native species to plant when it comes time to, decorate a front yard or a backyard or just property in general. Is that something that you've all in your field have struggled with, getting them to say, hey, quit bringing in these, plants from who knows where when you've got these in your backyard that are suited for the climate?
It's been a challenge as long as I've been working with trees, and it continues to be a challenge to this day. And it's very difficult to get, I think, the education out there first, because if the public are not aware of our natives, they're not going to go to the nurseries and ask. So it's a supply and demand thing, and the nurseryman will sell what is trendy or popular. So that's why you see probably 1 million silver maples around the greater Lafayette area, because folks come into the nursery and they ask for a fast-growing tree, and it's cheap, and that's what the nurseries provide. At least it's native. I'm not complaining from that standpoint, but that's the kind of
attitude.
Attitude.
And these. There are lots of reasons for that, and many of the commercial varieties and the exotic species that are from other parts of the world have features that are very attractive. I mean, they have flowers, or they have a form that's good, or they have a unique leaf color that is attractive in an urban situation or a suburban situation. And so those are things that are pushed, and they're also many times easy to grow, and natives may be very difficult to grow. From collecting seeds in the wild to getting them to germinate and those kinds of things. So just getting the word out about natives is I think is really important, but is tough. And but there is progress in that direction. I know Illinois, began 20 years ago, began in their state nurseries using all natives, producing all natives, where they had formerly produced a lot of other species. And so we move in that direction, but it's a relatively slow move. And you have to come up with good natives. Someone says, well, if you don't want me to plant this exotic, tell me a native that'll do the same thing.
Well, that's my question.
And so that's where a book like this really comes in handy.
So we can start the new native trend. I'm going to put you on the spot. I mean, what's a good plant or tree that you would suggest that would grow? Obviously it's not going to be 100% easy, but something that's a good native species that isn't that common anymore that you may want to suggest.
That's a loaded question.
Yeah.
That is a loaded question. You have to consider the site. If I had to pick a couple off the top of my head, okay. If you have room, there are several oak species that I would recommend. Chestnut oak comes to mind because it has so many amazing characteristics. It grows very quickly for an oak tree, for instance, and most people really frown upon growing oaks. Oh, they're too slow. They won't give me shade. Well, I will argue that. And sassafras has always been one of my favorite trees. It has a little bit of a suckering tendency, but it is well worth it. Absolutely incredible year-round glory, I guess. It's just beautiful, and its value to wildlife from a fruiting standpoint is also unbeatable. Those are two off the top of my head.
Now, when you say suckering, what do you mean by that?
The roots.
Okay, sucking up the water.
Yeah, no, the roots will sprout
Okay.
new trees.
Okay.
And so if you do not control them, your yard will become full of sassafras sprouts, essentially. And that's very easily handled by mowing, but some people
You have to
don't
mow.
realize that. Yeah.
Well, what's the status of native trees? Are there some that are on the brink of, disappearing?
Sure, there are a lot of rare species. Some are endangered species, and it's interesting. Some of the most endangered species are also some of the most commonly planted species. Bald cypress, for instance, is one of those that occurs down in the lower Wabash River Valley and was harvested nearly to elimination in the state. And it's highly preferred and very popular in nurseries, so lots and lots of people plant bald cypress. But if you try and find it in the wild in Indiana, it's very difficult. Northern Catawba is another species that is listed as endangered, but it is everywhere and normally occurs down again in the lower Wabash River Valley in floodplains and all. And people love to plant it because it's spectacular when it flowers. And it used to be utilized for fence posts and things like that. The wood is extremely durable, so you see a lot of Catawba.
By large, of course, means it's people have planted it in yards and that kind of thing, as opposed to finding it actually in the wild, reproducing and living by itself in the wild, which is it's very rare.
Yep.
Scientifically, does that change, the future of the tree? Whether it's been, hundreds and hundreds of years growing in the wild, or if it's just planted in people's yards? I mean, I don't know if there's research on, the long-term effects of that.
As far as, of course, if it's brought in, if it's planted frequently in yards, if it indeed is a viable plant, in other words, it produces viable seed, then the potential for it spreading into the surrounding natural environment would be there. And so it would certainly be possible. I don't know of any. We are usually working in the opposite direction, where people bringing in exotics, planting them, and then those exotic species invading natural stands and compete with and many times replacing our native species. So we usually come from a different direction, trying to keep people from bringing in exotics that might turn out to be invasive and spread to natural areas.
Those are my only questions. Anything else you guys wanted to add?
One of the things that I might mention is that Sally's got another project in the works on shrubs and woody vines of Indiana, which are the other woody components, and that will be coming out in about a year and a half, I think. And
Through
again,
Purdue
Press has agreed to publish that too, and so that will complete all the woody species in the state and the surrounding states. We will expand it to that as well. So that's a up and coming feature, and the second edition of this book is coming out very shortly.
Okay.
And which will include some exotic species that are commonly encountered in the wild.
All right. Well, we'll have you back when the second book comes out. How's that sound?
Good.
All right.
Sally Weeks and Harmon Weeks, two of the three authors, along with George Parker. The book is Native Trees of the Midwest: Identification, Wildlife Values, and Landscaping Use, published by Purdue University Press. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.